So why is this so immature in wildland fires? So these are out west. Okay, wagons probably started from here, and these are wagon wheel ruts. And this is solid rock. This isn't like fossilized, this was solid rock. And what would happen is a wagon would pull up to these ruts. This one's in Wyoming, I think. Would pull up, and I'm sure Ma said, I don't think we ought to take the wagon over that. That doesn't look good. And Pa probably said, well, that guy took his wagon over that. I know I can take my wagon over that, right? And then the ruts got a little bit deep, okay? And they probably like arrows all sticking out of their tires and the wagons, a few times later. So why is this immature in wildland fire? Well, consider the origin even of your agency, okay? So 80 years ago, what is more valuable? Timber or Civilian Conservation Corps, Depression-era refugee firefighters? It's timber. Every action of every agency at every level only reinforced that every time there was a fatality. They were kind of like a pain. They were expected, but we didn't like it when they happened. Agencies didn't even pay to send the bodies of firefighters back home. Even Edward Pulaski, father of Pulaski, he fought his agency till the day he died, to get a disability, for his injuries incurred in 1910. So, now, obviously, those attitudes are different, and that's a good thing. But you got to look at the DNA of, we're all prisoners of our own cultures. That's just a reality, right? I'm just the same from the military culture. So think about how many of you have the word boss on your qualification card, red card, blue card, whatever you use. How many people? Boss. That's like almost everybody, okay? What other industry uses the term boss as an actual job title? Because that's some chain gang, that's some like cool hand lube, Texas chain gang. Getting some water, boss. Think about it. Boss. Okay? So I know there's a pit boss, and their job is to take your money away, right? That is not a mission-driven culture. They do not have a whole bunch of discretionary authority, right, because of the cameras and all that. And who does the pit boss work for is the mob boss. Those are the only two I am aware of, right? Boss. So that's still in our system, that thinking. So what happened is, every time there was a fatality, we reacted like bosses. If these low-paid resources, seasonals, would just follow the rules, nothing bad would happen. And now look what happened. So now we're going to have to make more rules. That's how we created this bureaucracy that we're in, And that's what we've got to overcome in order to bend this curve up. That's a big challenge, So we're all prisoners of our own culture with that. So this is about 2 years ago now, an ops chief is telling me a story about this. And he's like, oh my God, this just happened to me. So he's on a fire, he's the ops chief. It was in Nevada, it was somewhere, they were based out of Las Vegas or close to Las Vegas. And they had a fire, it's up in the mountains, so it's 11,000 feet, it's super hot, that day. And they needed to do a recon. And so he's talking to the helicopter and the helitack crew that goes with the helicopter. And he's like, look, it's really dangerous flying conditions. I want to minimize our exposure to risk. That's my intent, right? So what I want you to do is just take the aircraft up, fly over there, recon, report, return. That's it. They're like, okay. So, life goes on. 20 minutes later, whatever, he hears on the radio, pilot +4, taking off, recon. He's like, +4? +4? The whole idea. So they do their thing, they come back. And he goes and he meets with them, and he's talking to the helitack foreman, the crew leader. And he's like, what the hell was this +4 that I heard? Well, that's our SOP. Yeah, but the whole intent was to like limit your exposure to risk. Well, yeah, but that's our SOP. That's that wagon wheel rut, you know, that we got to get out of in order to be able to really look at this now with a new light. Because, I'll let you read that. Classic Uncle Albert. So we really don't need little teeny tweaks to a system that's old and not working. We really need new tools. We need not 1990s. 1990s is better than the 70s, but we really need to go to the 21st century, which is this piece. So we got our probability, we got the consequence, but what this doesn't capture very well is this exposure discussion. Exposure. So, and there's a lot of different ways to think about exposure. Okay. You can have number of fuel cycles, number of people, number of hours exposed, number of hours on an engine, number of operational periods. So that's one aspect of exposure. But here's another aspect. So remember Division A. High risk for how many things? 3, right? So we had snags, falling objects. We had road conditions. And we had aviation operations. So what is the equation? What is this telling you? Is this high plus high plus high? What does that diagram say? Or is it now you don't have to be a mathematician. Which answer feels right to you based on your experience? High cube? Oh yeah. Because you cannot take one high risk and overlay another high risk and overlay another high risk and not be doing something to that curve. Because Murphy's Law, it's like the paratroopers yesterday. I mean, you can't put that much stuff that luck is a factor and not have something, not increase the chances of something going wrong, right? Even though our little risk assessment would have just said high. High plus high equals high. Just as high because of those 3 things, right? So it isn't just, it's what greatest risk are we exposed to, right? If you think about the paratroopers, we exposed 74 paratroopers to like really high risk, but we actually reduced the exposure of all the Army because of what they did. So sometimes it's okay to accept high risk, you know, with those that are more trained, more competent, you know, more able to operate in that environment because we're actually lowering the risk to a whole bunch of other people. So that's one way to think about it. But back in craps, with our fuzzy dice, if you roll those dice the first time, you have a 97% chance of surviving your first roll. That's pretty good. And I say 97 because you still have 3% chance of snake eyes, and you would lose, right? So 97% chance, that's pretty good. The second roll, you only have 88% chance. All of a sudden, the odds are going down. Your third roll is 77%. By the time you get to roll number 6, you've only got a 50% chance of survival. You know, if you could get to 20 rolls, you'd have less than 5% chance of surviving your next roll. So that's an aspect of exposure. That's the luck runs out, period, part that you'll have to consider. There's multiple ways of thinking about exposure. But the key thing is, the more exposure or the more layers of risk that you're adding, you're creating just this geometric chance of something bad happening. Just like in craps, it's a curve, but it's a curve going down, not up. Or it's a risk curve to you going up. So this is the first step. We need a more sophisticated probability severity matrix to be really thinking about the real risk that we're putting people in. Like you said, if that air platform goes down, it's very, very, very unlikely that it will, but if it does, it's catastrophic, right? So this is probably more accurate to understand the risk levels that we're putting people in. So, for example, how many people have seen The Wizard of Oz? Pretty much everybody. Okay, that's good. That gives me great hope. So in The Wizard of Oz, it's very VUCA land in Oz, I will tell you, right? Because they're in high risk for what? Lions, tigers, and bears. Oh my, yes. Oh my. Oh my is another way of saying VUCA. You're at VUCA level. You're at inherently high risk. Oh my risk. Oh my cute, right? Now, that's just on the yellow brick road. Stay on the yellow brick road. Never get off the yellow brick road. You get off the yellow brick road, what happens? Now you got wicked witches. You have flying monkeys. You have hallucinogenic flowers. Oz is inherently high risk. Oz is a bad place, right? And that's why Dorothy was such a badass, because she navigated this whole environment and got home again. So with this, we would know a little more accurately what risk level we're in, okay? And that's a good thing. Now we know kind of more, all right, we're actually in high risk more often than not. That's good. But we still got to know, is that risk acceptable? So you got to understand the values of risk, right? The gain, risk versus gain, right? So the values of risk. Here's a bunch of values of risk. So I'm going to give you 5 seconds to look at this list. You pick what you think is the #1 priority value. And then when I say go, I just want you to shout it out. Okay? Okay, go.
LCAP.
Nice. Everybody on the same page, okay? I heard elk habitat, and you're telling me luck does not play a role? You are disqualified for any further input into this, okay? You have an agenda. Okay, so not everybody agrees. And that's okay. Because again, it's subjective, right? All you got to go on is what you think. That's all I ask, right? You don't have a tool to guide that. So, all right, did anybody pick the power line, the local power distribution line? Okay, nobody picked that. So, what if that's the primary transmission line, let's say to Phoenix, on a 114-degree day? Then what happens to that value of risk? It goes way up, right? Because people are going to die if something happens to that thing. Okay, so that's the thing. That's the missing component right now. This right here, incident priority. I want you, and this is something you want to take a picture of because I thought it was in the handout. It's not in the handout. So, for wherever your role is, whether you're a crew leader, whether you're an FMO, whether you're an agency administrator, I want you to make a list like this, okay? Keep it, if you're on an IMT, this should just be a standard part of your SOP. It doesn't have to be worded like this. This is just an example that we made. But come up with your triage criteria of values of risk. That's all we're talking about. A triage criteria for your values of risk. That's really important. Because without something like this, You have no way to come up with that common operating picture on those values, right? Now, if you have this now, and we go back here, we could probably get a lot closer together at ranking these values of risk. But you can't do it without this. And the last thing you want to do is ask an agency administrator who is all freaked out because there's a giant fire going in their backyard. They're not thinking their clearest at that point in time to come up with this with no tool to get them started, no compass to navigate. That's what that does. It gives you at least a compass. So here's a list, and again, I'm going to zoom in on this for people in the back. A couple of Type 3 ICs a few years ago did this, and they triaged their values at risk on this fire they had out in the Southwest. And so we will take a quick look at this. Okay, so you can see their top one was first responders. You know, the age-old thing you see on incident action plans is, in fact, first responders in public. You know, in fact, firefighter and public safety. That's what it was. It's like, look, that's more of that gobbledygook bureaucracy, because those are two different priorities. And you have to risk more with one or less with the other to save the other or something like that. Obviously, first responders are first because you don't want an incident within an incident, right? If a responder becomes a victim, you've only made the problem worse, you haven't made it better. So that makes sense, right? And all the way down with all their different values, all the way down to some highway infrastructure along Forest Highway 3. I like that. It's like a 4-lane dirt road out there somewhere, Forest Highway. I want to see this place. Okay, so that all makes sense. Now, if we're in Division A, lions, tigers, bears, we're high, you know, oh my cubed, right? We're in high cubed on Division A. And we're protecting this value at risk, number 12, is that acceptable risk? No! No! There's no way that math could possibly line up. Okay? Now, what if we're back, we're holding the road open because we're having to evacuate a population urgently. Now is it acceptable risk? Yeah, it probably is, right? So that makes sense. Now our challenge comes when you get down to the middle somewhere, like our owls. Who likes owls? Okay, you better like owls, because if it was the elk and the luck, and if it wasn't the owls, you'd be history, man. But that's okay. So you've got a redeeming quality. I like owls. Owls are cool. So how much risk are the owls worth? Would it be okay to be in Division A, high 3, high cube, protecting the owls? So there's another huge missing piece in wildland farming. And so we need something like this. Need a mechanism, a guideline, at least as a start point, to say what these different categories of values of risk are worth. No owl is worth your life. Okay, yeah, got that. How much risk is the owl worth? Okay, so in this case, is it an endangered species? Okay, maybe that's high risk. Is it an at-risk species? That's not worth high risk, much as I love owls. This is the upstream component to all of risk management. This does not exist because we just made it. Okay? So until something like this comes down from the NWCG world, which could take a little while, okay, based on my experience with them, you want to make this. You want to make this for where you work. It's either going to be your personal criteria that you'll use to guide your crew, or, you know, if you're an agency administrator, you can use this based on delegation of authority, whatever, okay? But without this, the rest of the discussion is completely subjective, at least as a start point, an anchor point. That's all it is. You say, on this incident, does this still make sense? It might not, and you adjust something. But you got to have a start point. Without that, it doesn't work. Okay, so the way this is, the beginning, the common operating picture, that's what this is doing. We're identifying the values of risk out there. We're coming up with the priority of those values of risk. And we're coming up with making sure that's clear to everybody. And then we go through this process. We talked a little bit about this yesterday. So, what's our end state, the way things are, the way we want them to be, that's the gap. Come up with our objectives, success conditions, strategies, tactics, and so forth. At the tactics meeting that the incident management team does, what should be happening is identifying task and purpose as part of those tactical assignments. That would be the 215, that sheet. And then in the risk analysis, are those acceptable risks? And that ought to map all the way back up to where we started with that values of risk stuff. That would be the IMT process. And so that should be clear, but it isn't easy.